just admit that something is brewing at McLaren and it could lead to a crisis? And no, I don't think it's anything to do with the present or social media pressuring. I feel like Zak Brown's brewing a plan somewhere just in case one of their stars leaves. And that if all goes well, McLaren and Brazil could be working together for the first time in over 30 years. I've needed some time to think about the situation between the team and its drivers, but it does seem like McLaren are very reluctant to impose team orders. Even Lando Norris, the guy who would benefit the most from them, is somewhat opposed to asking for them. And the key word is that for this year or beyond. Have you noticed a trend lately that brand new contracts are announced for certain drivers or even team personnel that doesn't have a hard and steadfast amount of years attached to it? It's always a multi-year contract or something and beyond. I don't think it's necessarily just a case of just saying to other teams, what's the amount of contract time on my driver got to do with you, big nose? I think it's also got something to do with that these contracts are a lot more complex these days. There are probably far more conditions attached to them that giving it a set amount of years is just not workable anymore. There have got to be other conditions attached to it, like get-out clauses, conditions, what have you. And as a result, I think that both Lando and Oscar, their times at McLaren, they could be as long as a piece of string or as short as a piece of string. I recall making a video nearly a year ago about a similar subject, about why I thought Lando leaving McLaren would be inevitable when Oscar was first showing his hand around the time of his sprint performances. Fast forward to now, and whilst Lando winning in Miami and Zandvoort might indicate that might not be the case and he might be staying for the foreseeable future, I reckon that give it another 18 or 24 months or so by the time we get to 2026, and the team and the drivers know exactly where McLaren lies in the new hierarchy regarding the new regulation cycle, there might be more reasons as to why either one of the drivers or both might consider leaving if the situation between them has become completely untenable. Right now, things are looking okay. They're bubbling away, but so far it's remaining civil, but that's dependent on whether or not McLaren get their act together, which right now they haven't. And maybe that's why McLaren are preparing themselves by beefing up their young driver program with Gabriel Boretto and Rio Horikawa and Pato O'Ward always being given a pat on the back by Zak all the time. And oh yeah, having a pretty good car too. That will probably help getting existing Formula 1 drivers onto your docket. But right now though, the team does have the best lineup on the grid in terms of consistency and scoring points, with the pair of Piastri and Norris scoring the most in the last 4 races. Clearly, this is not the worst problem to have, 2 drivers scoring well, with Norris's 10 podiums and Piastri's consistency, and now being the only driver to have completed every single lap of the season. Now we're through 2/3 of it. Both achievements are not to be sniffed at. The team is in a good place. For now, that could easily change. But I bet you that once McLaren sort themselves out and start to rely on more bold and risky strategies, the relationship between Lando and Oscar will start to tense up. It's a fact of life. We've seen it play out over so many driver pairings, over so many decades. It's inevitable. And if they're not careful, it could lead to explosive results, and it is really telling that McLaren needs to take it seriously because Toto feels sorry for them. Toto! And just telling them, yeah, you really need to think about your team orders there, Zak, because I know that it can get extremely bad. Let's make one thing clear though. I'm sure that both Lando and Oscar as people get along just fine outside of the cockpit and when they're just living their lives on the streets of Monte Carlo. And even now, the frustration that is brewing between them probably isn't based on character or general dislike. Right now, I think that the frustration and ire and disappointment that they're exhibiting on camera is aimed squarely at the higher-ups by not actually having a clear plan. No team orders, there are no instructions, just those papaya rules, which basically means you can race each other but don't crash, and Oscar just takes it literally. Well, he wasn't told to stay behind Lando and protect him, so there was an opportunity there, he took it. As many people have said, and quoted Ayrton Senna, and they were all attributing many months ago, if you don't go for a gap, you're no longer a racing driver. So Oscar was doing just that. And I reckon that Andrea and Zak were not prepared to inherit the best car crown from Red Bull this year. Next year perhaps, but definitely not this year. You can sense it with how both Brown and Stella operate. them both insisting every single race that their car is not the fastest and that there's no need to establish team orders because they've got two #1 drivers. I've been following McLaren for about a decade now, through the okay and good times as well as the really bad times. They are trying, McLaren, to maintain the aura and the vibes that they had from 2019 when they had to take a big dose of reality after 2018. They realised they could no longer blame their problems on Honda and that their car was just really, really bad and they needed to reinvent themselves. Under the watch of Andrea Seidel, it did work. They became more humble. They had the forever forward principle to abide by. And that showed McLaren had really learned and they'd become less fastidious, less serious. They were more fun, more exciting. They embraced the papaya, the classic colour of Bruce McLaren in the early 70s. But that era of McLaren is well and truly over. The team isn't ready to accept that though, that they are that good. And it's been accelerated due to Red Bull missing the mark with their upgrades for 2024, which has allowed not just McLaren to catch up, but Ferrari and Mercedes also. But the team just will not bite. They will not accept that they are one of the best, if not the best. They just want to go softly, softly, make the most of this opportunity being in the podium spots, and just secure as many points as possible. Don't take risks. No, please don't take risks. Risks are scary. Even though it could complicate or deny Lando Norris going after Max Verstappen in the driver's title. And I reckon that right now, Lando's goals aren't the team's priority, because remember, they're always about team first. I believe that Zak and Andrea, they don't really care about what the drivers do on an individual level. They care about the team and what they could offer them. An opportunity to do something that they haven't done this century, and that is winning the Constructors' title. Now, of course, granted, the last time they won the Drivers' Championship was with Lewis Hamilton about 16 years ago or so that's a fair chunk of change in terms of time. But the last time they won the Constructors' title was a further decade back in 1998. The first year I watched every single F1 race. I dabbled in 1997, but 1998 I remember very well. And I bet you that Zak Brown, his team, winning the Constructors' title for the first time this century will be a huge deal. It'll be a huge brag to the McLaren investors, the public. There'll be many slaps on the back and Zak Brown running around going, yeah, 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 I'll leave a dirt sheet, Carlos. You could have had this, but you were playing. Yeah, slap back. But that is not a guarantee. That could change in 2025 when the field is closer and driver synergy is more important than ever. Since the model established by Red Bull having one mega driver and one good driver, that's not going to yield both championships anymore. Which probably means that unless Kimi Antonelli goes into 2025 ripping hard, Mercedes aren't probably thinking about the Constructors and instead giving the Italian rookie time to get used to F1 before coming back in full for 2026. With or without George. So if McLaren is serious in going for a full-on, full-fat championship charge throughout the entirety of 2025 instead of a few races in, then they really need to change the way that they go racing and the way that they operate. Lando Norris now has a car that can secure him poles as well as victories and give him exactly what he wants. That is something he has never had before. He has said so himself. After he won the Dutch Grand Prix, he was amazed, he was buzzed. The last time he could think this was for a few races back in 2021. And by all rights, he should be the guy that McLaren backed to go after a world title. But that hasn't happened, due to an overwhelming fear from the team's management of undermining one of their drivers, with Andrea Stella in particular having very bad memories of that dynamic from his days at Ferrari. I mean, come on, this actually carries a lot of weight because Ferrari, they practically wrote the book regarding team orders. He wasn't the guy backing Felipe Massa, the underdog or something like that, no. He was seeing it from the point of view of Fernando Alonso, the guy who clearly benefited from team orders. So that's a really interesting perspective to actually see. And these are the comments right here. So he knew exactly what was going on in his time at Ferrari. I think even with Ferrari, when there was a successful driver, the successful driver was successful because he was gaining the success on track. I think even in the cases in which there was a blatant support from one of the drivers, actually, I'm not so sure that it wasn't something that actually backfired. So that's why I think this thing needs to approach with common sense, needs to approach with racing values, and needs to be approached with the support of both drivers. If one of the two drivers doesn't accept that we have a certain way of going racing, we are not going to succeed. What Stella is saying here is that the one driver rules all model can lead to success to some extent, but that it's not really going to breed success for the long term. and it's down to the team ethos and both drivers accepting the status quo for it to fully flourish. Well, I mean, at Ferrari, that's quite easy, or at least it was historically. That's just the way it is. They have one really big superstar driver, and the other driver, he's there to pick up the pieces if the first driver's car broke down. And many people who were the number 2 Ferrari drivers basically accepted this. Everyone will jump at the opportunity to go over and race for Ferrari, even if it means you're not the number 1 driver and you have to obey team orders religiously. That's what Rubens Barrichello had to put up with, even though there were moments that he did really take it with a pinch of salt, okay, a pack of salt. Then, of course, there's Felipe Massa. Then, of course, there was Kimi Raikkonen for a year, but basically he didn't care. As long as he got his chalk ice and his gloves and steering wheel, he was happy. Oh yeah, a glass of beer. And McLaren, though, it's not easy. In fact, it's really hard. And that's also from an historical point of view. Stella and Brown, though, want to buck that trend and eschew that facet of McLaren, with them not only giving Norris all the support he needs, but also having a plan for Oscar as well. Andrea Stella is being really complicated regarding the situation at the Italian Grand Prix, because they didn't want to impose team orders, yet they wanted an outcome that would appease both drivers by allowing them to go racing, not undermining them. But at the same time, it did undermine them, because it left Lando Norris confused, and it left Oscar frustrated for the fact that there was no plan after that, and then they were bickering amongst themselves, they lost rubber, they then couldn't go for the 1-2, but then Stella goes and says that he welcomes those types of opportunities, where both drivers could give it their all, and that they could get the best possible outcome. What? What is it? But then, in the midst of all of that, I saw a really interesting comment which really got my eyebrows twitching, and that had something to do with what Stella said about Oscar and the future. Stella said that the future is indeed Oscar's, and they talk about investing in him as a driver, as well as his place within the team, whether him going all out for the best result possible, or whether or not he needs to support his teammate, basically making him into a true, fully fledged McLaren driver. Say what you will regarding what happened at Monza. The fact of the matter is, though, McLaren did not impose direct team orders, in that whoever gets out of turn 1 ahead remains ahead, and if that order had been imposed, Piastri would have done what was expected of him and defended from the likes of Charles Leclerc. And for the way that we saw with Piastri, it might have actually worked out. But the fact is, though, both drivers were given carte blanche to do what they needed to do and make the most out of the fact that their cars were the fastest, even though Stella said that they weren't. Come on, let's be real, they are. But then I just think about Stella's comments again, and it just makes me really think that McLaren are beginning to anticipate that in the not too distant future, say in the next 2-3 years or something like that, Lando Norris could realistically move on to another team, having pretty much gotten everything that he could possibly get. Even though Lando has said that he would like to win a world championship with that team, how is he going to do that if the team aren't going to fully back him? Even now they're starting to say that they might consider it in the next few races or so. They really should have done it a few races ago, let's be real. And all of that will play into the hands of another team who is more than happy to look at Lando Norris and go, yeah, we'll make you our leader, no questions. But I don't see Lando doing that right now, because it makes no sense for him to leave the team, as he's seen McLaren rise up from being lower midfielders to now being the leading squad. He wants to make the most out of it. Why would you leave when it's starting to get juicy at the team that you've been with for so long? However, 2026 is when everything changes. We will have a very interesting drivers market, my friend, because all the other drivers who are currently on the grid and who might be joining the grid in 2026 will be eyeing up their team as well as other teams as to who got the regulations right. McLaren might have got them right, they might not have. They might have fallen down. Red Bull might have fallen down. We might have a completely different team right at the top of the pecking order. So all of these drivers are going to be looking really carefully and to see whether or not it's worth staying where they are. And supposing Red Bull does get back up to the top and actually remains there, then I could realistically see for 2027 one of those drivers, be it Oscar or Lando, choosing to actually go over to the Milton Keynes-based team. And we also have to remember that Helmut Marko has said many times that both McLaren drivers are on his radar and he would love to have them if he could. And also Max Verstappen rates both McLaren drivers. If he could be a team principal and he couldn't race himself, he said that he would pick Piastri and Norris to be his team. And I know that you're probably going to be thinking, oh, there is no way that Oscar Piastri is going to be going to Red Bull to partner up with Max Verstappen. That dynamic will simply not work because it's not really working at McLaren. That is a very good point, but we don't know what's going to be happening with Max Verstappen in 2026 because not even Helmut Marko knows for sure. He can't give a fully committed answer, an unequivocal, yes, Max will be here for 2026. But if we get into that season and McLaren's still near the front, but another team is close, and if things continue to remain in some sort of stalemate as as to who gets favoured more, well, from Lando's point of view, he'll have gotten everything he could out of McLaren and will want to find a new team who can give him the lead role without any ambiguity. And from Oscar's point of view, both he and his manager Mark Webber will have gotten tired of McLaren vacillating and not honouring equal status, that it would end up wasting their time if they stayed. And who knows, might we see both drivers leaving at the same time? It could happen, it's possible, but highly unlikely, because the prize here for both drivers is to get the leadership role of McLaren. Right now, Lando is in the pound seat, but with Piastri, it could happen in a year or two's time if the ceiling ends up being higher than Norris's. Get yourself strapped in, my friend, because this is going to be a long and winding battle for McLaren's supremacy, which is why McLaren's F2 prospect couldn't have come at a better time. Yes, Gabriel Boretto is more connected to Audi at the moment than McLaren, but the case of bringing in the Brazilian to F1 has greatly intensified now that the chance of him securing back-to-back junior titles is on the cards, now that he's closed the gap to Isaac Hadjar to almost single digits. And also another key facet of Bortoletto's campaign this year is the fact that he's one of the few consistent F2 drivers out there, because most of the grid have had to rely on RNGesus to either get a good result or to prevent them getting a really bad result. Paul Aaron, he was really consistent, but now he's not anymore. Then what happened with the Prema drivers who expected to do well? They had no clue. Zane Maloney started well and he's completely fallen off. It's all going completely askew. But I feel like McLaren might have a little plan here, and Zak Brown, he's really shrewd with his contracts, and I think he might be onto something. Instead of doing what other teams are doing and just giving a prospective junior driver a reserve driver role and then we never see or hear from them again, note sadly Felipe Drugovich, I believe that McLaren might partner up with their old flame Fernando Alonso and ensure that he and his management team get on the books with Sauber and give Gabriel Boretto the opportunity to race in Formula 1 directly with an actual Formula 1 team, and a team that basically has zero expectations from the fandom at large, because barely anybody recognises or even remembers that they were even competing. In fact, it's gotten so bad that Audi's really taking a dim view and saying that their current performance cannot continue. And Mattia Binotto is now stepping in to be the temporary team principal until Jonathan Wheatley from Red Bull arrives, meaning Aluni Bravi has now been consigned to the marketing department again. You know things are bad when Mattia is now going back to doing a job he absolutely did not want to do. Supposing McLaren and Alonso jointly submitted a 2-year loan deal to Sauber with the condition that McLaren could take him back afterward, I think it would be a deal that the team would accept, since presently, nobody really wants to drive for Sauber at the moment other than Nico Hülkenberg. Or the team can't make up their minds as to who could go onto their really extensive shortlist. Seriously, I think there's about a dozen people on it. I think that Sauber, in their current position, will completely acquiesce to Zak Brown's demands, because they're getting a back-to-back junior champion of F3 and F2 to partner up with Nico Hülkenberg, who is also a dab hand, and Bortoletto could learn from Nico. There could be some good experience put together. He can then get some experience with Audi and a big works operation before he then goes potentially to either replace Piastri or Norris, or if they both leave, become the brand new team leader and the future, along potentially with a more experienced pair of hands, or maybe even Carlos Sainz comes back to McLaren, who knows? But the fact of the matter is, though, is that Bortoletto getting 2 years in Formula 1, actually competing instead of just doing reserve driver duties and being in the simulator, that will be so much better experience, and we need to see more of that, and I'm so excited that 2025 is already looking likely to be the year of the rookie, like we got in 2019. But in my honest opinion, and no, this is not me saying it because I'm a Piastri fan, I think Norris will be the more likely one to leave because he's gotten the most out of McLaren. His journey has been longer. There's not really much more he can do, especially if he goes for a world championship. And if he loses that by single digits, he will be utterly broken. He'll be looking for a brand new change of pace, a refresh start like Lewis Hamilton is getting at Ferrari potentially. Piastri is McLaren's future, but I thought that future would be coming in like 2, 3, 4 years. I didn't expect it to be happening maybe next year. It's a dangerous game that McLaren is playing right now, trying to avoid the historic driver feuds that have become synonymous with the team since the days of Prost and Senna, and I really hope that this plan doesn't last and the team has no choice but to enact team orders in Norris's favour should we leave Baku and Norris gets within 50 points of Verstappen for the title. By then, it makes no sense to remain neutral because 50 points? That's only 2 DNFs, and if Verstappen does get a DNF, or actually doesn't get into the point, the first time he's not done that in over 5 years or something like that, then Norris will be right in the pound seat again. But at the same time though, Norris really does need to speak up. If he really thinks he can go for the World Championship, he needs to be more vocal on the radio and say, look, I'm faster, I need to be ahead. And therefore the team will actually hear him out, because that's part of their policy as well, that they take the feedback of the drivers seriously and then they come back to them. And if Norris is a bit more vocal and vociferous and insistent that team orders are enacted to just get them a few more points, McLaren as a team, but also him as a driver against Max, then he might be heard. And this decision to be nice and fair and diplomatic and not rely on team orders, that's going to play into the lap of Oscar Piastri. If he's not given instructions to hold back and support Lando, he's going to go hell for leather. Of course he will. Any driver would. 2025 will be critical, as will 2026. Next year will be even more important for Norris to assert his role, as the scores will be zeroed and everyone goes again. Piastri will be into his 3rd season, the same number of seasons that Norris started to show that he could actually win races, and that was in a slower car. But I do think that Gabriel Boretto doing what he is doing in F2 and potentially winning back-to-back world championships, that will make McLaren breathe a little easier. That, okay, we've got somebody on our books who is actually the real deal and has done something that Oscar Piastri has done as well. If we were to lose Lando, unfortunately, from both cases, then at least we've got somebody who is within our development program and we can justify that it's doing its job, and then for Bortoletto can then lead the charge and Brazil will absolutely fall in love with McLaren again, because right now Brazil needs a Formula 1 driver on the grid. We need that enthusiasm back in F1, we really, really do. We've managed to get a little bit of taste of that with Franco Colapinto, but we need to have that now for a full-term drive. But at the same time though, having Bortoletto in would not be the most ideal scenario. In the most ideal scenario, they would like to keep Piastri and Norris for all of eternity, Brown and Stella, but that is not going to happen because they're both young. They'll want to look at other teams, a change of pace, a fresh start, and also they are going to want a championship, and two drivers cannot win a driver's championship. They can win a constructors, and if that's what McLaren's prerogative is, then good for them, but it's not good for their drivers' morale in the long run. So McLaren, I'm just telling you, stop being so conservative and get your act together. And another team that needs to get its act together is Red Bull. It looks like they left the door open for McLaren to take their team title, albeit in the hardest way possible. But that might be for the best, I think, should they want to finish this rule cycle on a high next year. To find out why I think giving up on the RB20 might not be such a bad idea if it means that the RB21 is better, go and watch this video next, and seriously, hear me out, okay? Giving up is not the worst thing that could possibly happen.